They are coming home, but the government is taking no chances. British citizens will be flown out of Wuhan and quarantined for 2 weeks, possibly in a military base, though some were told they would have to leave their children behind.
I could be evacuated, but there was no chance of my son being evacuated. They were sorry, and did I still want to go?
Also on News at 10 tonight. The government renationalises the Northern rail franchise. How they will miss our manners. Brexit MEPs lift a metaphorical 2 fingers to their colleagues for one last time. A recipe for nothing but more tears. John Irvine has a special report on the Palestinian reaction to Donald Trump's plan for the Middle East. And
Jamie Chadwick wins the first W Series race.
it's a man's world, but not for much longer. The woman who wants to shake up Formula One.
I see it as motivation, and I genuinely believe that, women are strong enough to make it to Formula One, and the ultimate goal is to prove that.
This is ITV News at 10 with Tom Bradby.
Good evening. The government insists the threat posed to us from the outbreak of the coronavirus in China is still low. But that seems somewhat at odds with the news that 200 British citizens in Wuhan will be flown home and could be put into military quarantine for a fortnight. It is also in stark contrast to the policy up until today, which was to send returnees home from Heathrow with nothing more than a leaflet. In some ways, though, they may be the lucky ones, as China is increasingly cut off from the outside world. Throughout the day, more airlines have announced they will be following BA's decision and cancelling flights out of mainland China.
The British military are well rehearsed in fighting deadly outbreaks. Now they could help combat the spread of coronavirus. During the Ebola crisis, these barracks in York were used to train army medics. ITV News understands the government's now considering using a military base to quarantine the hundreds of Britons being flown back from the centre of the outbreak. Around 200 British nationals remain trapped in the city of Wuhan, now in lockdown, to try and contain the disease that's killed more than 130 people. Soon, a flight is due to bring them back home.
Quite stressed, really. Pressure is at the limit.
But for expat English teacher Natalie Francis, who lives in Wuhan, the turmoil goes on. Her 3-year-old son Jamie has a Chinese passport.
I could be evacuated, but there was no chance of my son being evacuated. They were sorry, and did I still want to go? It did kind of leave me a bit speechless. Eventually I said, the obvious, no, I won't leave without my son.
In Westminster this afternoon, the Health Secretary chaired a meeting of the Cobra Emergency Committee. He said, "We're working hard to get British nationals back from Wuhan. Public safety is the top priority. Anyone who returns from Wuhan will be safely isolated for 14 days with all necessary medical attention." But for this British family, a holiday has turned into a nightmare. While Jeff Siddle can return with his 9-year-old daughter, her mother, who has a Chinese passport, can't come.
I feel absolutely terrible. I feel as though I'm leaving her without any support. What started as a family holiday has turned into a little nightmare.
British nationals in Wuhan had until 11 o'clock this morning to register themselves for the flight. It's thought they'll have to sign a contract agreeing to be held for 14 days in isolation when they return. They'll have medical checks before they board and once again when they arrive in the UK. After around 13 hours on a specially chartered flight, it's unclear if the plane will land at a commercial airport or an RAF base. The passengers could then be taken to a military-based facility for their 2-week quarantine. But will it be enough?
You don't know whether the UK will get away with this. France and Germany have had cases. The bottom line is we are a mercantile nation, we are a transport hub, world travel is still going on. So we don't know is the answer.
British Airways has suspended all flights to and from mainland China with immediate effect. And the Foreign Office has updated its advice, now warning against all but essential travel to the country. Drafting in the military shows just how seriously the British government is now taking this threat. If one of the evacuees is infected, they'd be the first known person to bring the virus here. Rebecca Barry, News at 10.
Well, the speed at which the coronavirus is spreading, not just across China, but also around the world, is increasingly alarming experts. China has now seen more cases in the last few weeks than during the whole of the SARS outbreak a decade and a half ago. It makes the challenge all the greater for those planning for the arrival of the 200 or so British nationals who've potentially been exposed to the virus.
The coronavirus is mysterious and fast-moving, so there's a desperation to limit its spread. In China, the number of people now infected has gone up to nearly 6,000. That's more cases than when SARS hit in 2002. 132 people have died from the coronavirus, and it continues to spread. 18 other countries have reported cases of it. People in Germany, Japan, Taiwan and Vietnam have also fallen ill with it, those who haven't even visited China. So to contain it here, the latest control tactic will be to quarantine British nationals returning from Wuhan for 14 days.
We don't normally quarantine large groups of people. This is somewhat unprecedented.
Natalie McDermott knows the challenge the government faces. She was quarantined herself when she returned from working in Ebola-hit West Africa.
How do you ensure that anyone who is infected and possibly infectious is kept away from people who are not infected when that is an unknown entity within that group of people?
Where the MOD chooses to quarantine those coming back from Wuhan is hugely important. Yes, they need to be cared for medically, but their identities must be protected too. They need to remain anonymous so they're not feared by the public.
But other nations have already acted. The first Americans back home from Wuhan landed a few hours ago after increased screening and checks. And anyone evacuated from there to Australia will be taken to Christmas Island, more than 1,000 miles away. Because avoiding the fearful scenes of the SARS outbreak is paramount. It too was a coronavirus. The Hong Kong government SARS inquiry was chaired by Sian Griffiths.
Information didn't flow fully enough in the first instance. Communication with the public wasn't good enough. The hospitals were under par and healthcare staff didn't really know what to do. So all of those aspects were things that needed addressing.
And this coronavirus is yet another unknown that needs more understanding before the spread will slow down. Lucy Watson, News at 10.
And I'm joined by Romilly here in the studio and by Debbie Edward, our China correspondent, our Asia correspondent rather, who is in China. Romilly, maybe I can start with you. Look, we thought this plane was coming back tomorrow, but apparently not.
Yeah, we were briefed just this afternoon that the plane would be leaving UK time tomorrow morning, and we have just been told in the last few minutes the flight will not leave tomorrow at all. The Foreign Office saying that we're doing everything we can to get the British people in Wuhan safely back to the UK. A number of countries' flights have been unable to take off as planned. We continue working urgently to organise a flight to the UK as soon as possible. We remain in close contact with the Chinese authorities and conversations are going on at all levels. So what we understand is happening is that the Chinese are just refusing permission for this flight to take off. What's not clear is why, because as you saw in the report there, other countries are managing to repatriate their citizens.
Well, maybe I can put that to Debbie. I mean, Debbie, this is a really remarkable situation. China effectively cutting itself off from the outside world.
Yes, tonight it very much feels like a country cut off and cutting itself off from the rest of the world. The level of containment we're seeing here now is on a scale never imposed before. British Airways is just one of a number of global airlines that has suspended flights. 6 neighbouring countries have closed their borders to China, and moving around within the country is becoming increasingly difficult and restricted. Everyone on the streets is wearing a mask, and people are only venturing out if, like me, they have to come to work. work or go to buy groceries. Tonight, the World Health Organization convened another emergency summit on the virus, and they say they're working with the Chinese authorities to try and reduce transmission rates. But the worrying development that we're seeing now is people becoming infected that haven't recently been to Wuhan or indeed to China. Today, the Chinese authorities predicted that it won't be until at least February the 8th before the rate of infection starts to slow down.
OK, Debbie, thank you very much indeed. Romilly, maybe I can finally come back to you. Look, we've seen the scenes in China. If it does get worse here, what's the government's plan?
Well, it's a pretty apocalyptic vision of what's going on in China, and there is no suggestion that anything like that situation will happen here. We should remember there have been no confirmed cases here as yet, but it's clear that something changed today. The government started taking this much more seriously. But I think the government's priority right now is going to be getting that flight, that repatriation flight back here to the UK. OK,
Romilly, thank you very much indeed. Back here now, and it is funny how these things all seem to happen at once. Just hours after the government here decided to ignore pressure from Washington and give the Chinese firm Huawei the all-clear to be involved in rolling out 5G, the US Secretary of State Mike Pompeo landed for talks without coffee, perhaps. He has been a harsh critic of the Chinese firm, warning of the potential security threat he says they pose. Carl is in Downing Street to talk about all this. Carl, I imagine this could have been, perhaps was, a bit of a frosty meeting.
Well, indeed, because even before he got here, Mike Pompeo was telling reporters on his plane of his disappointment in the British government's decision to allow Huawei, the Chinese firm, to play a part in the rollout of the next generation of mobile network, the 5G network, and was saying that he hoped the British government would think again about the decision because, in his words, our view of Huawei is putting it in your system creates real risk. And it's not the only difference of opinion, of course, because in that meeting that he had tonight with Dominic Raab, the Foreign Secretary, Mr. Raab told Mr. Pompeo that Britain was disappointed in the Americans for their failure to extradite Anne Sekulis, the woman who is wanted by police here for questioning in connection with the death of Harry Dunn. And all of this ahead of a meeting with the Prime Minister here tomorrow, where Boris Johnson will want to talk about the possibility of doing a trade deal with the United States post-Brexit. And those negotiations can start as soon as Brexit has happened on Friday. All this a reminder, Tom, that post-Brexit, Britain will want to do trade deals with nations in which we may be in dispute over other issues. And of course, not all of them will be quite as well disposed to us as the United States generally is.
OK, Carl, thank you very much indeed. Well, it is only a matter of weeks since the Conservatives were attacking what they called Labour's ideological plans to renationalise the railways. But today it was the Tories doing just that, with the announcement that the troubled Northern Rail franchise will soon be back in public hands. The news received a cautious welcome from some of those who've had to put up with years of cancellations and delays. As to what the government will do differently to end the misery from passengers, well, to be honest, there was not a lot of detail on that.
Tonight's evening crush hour on Northern. Another day ending just as miserably as it started.
It's just the same every single day. Like, there's not a day where you get on and you think, oh, I'm going to get a seat this morning. Yeah, and it's been like this for probably 2-3 years.
I mean, I paid £7 to go 2 stops.
And you don't even get a seat?
Don't get a seat. Yeah, pretty bad.
Northern has just been voted the train company with the highest levels of dissatisfaction on the entire network. Action has been taken today, but there are still questions about how it was ever allowed to get this bad.
Northern serves around 14 million. From March the 1st, it goes into public ownership, run by experienced railway managers working for government. 6,000 staff will be transferred to this so-called operator of last resort. All tickets remain valid.
I've asked the operator of last resort to do some simple things straight away. Deep clean the trains, they're filthy, and put a proper cleaning network in place. Things like ensuring that there's a Sunday service, which doesn't exist, and of course most of all focusing on trains turning up on time.
Northern failed!
They called it Northern Fail after years of stress, delays and misery. But the train firm, part of Arriva Group, today warned its departure won't fix big problems with the tracks.
The fact is that a number of those infrastructure schemes either have been delayed or have been deferred or cancelled, and so we're now running many more services on a network that in some places is too congested and isn't fit for that level of demand.
Network Rail says a vast upgrade of tracks and stations in the north of England will allow 40,000 more passengers a day. But many here insist improvements have not gone far enough.
Without addressing fundamental areas like right here, like Platform Zero at Leeds, which is still a building site 2 years after it's supposed to be built, like addressing fundamental signalling work, like addressing platforms at Piccadilly, we're not going to solve the underlying issues that exist. And frankly, any operator can come in and have the same problems as Northern have had.
Government agrees more change is needed to help rail customers, but can't yet say when and how it will be done. Tonight, Northern's passengers headed home with new promises, but the same old problems. Chris Choi, News at 10, Manchester.
The famous British superbike manufacturer Norton has gone into administration. Founded in 1898 and based at Castle Donington in Leicestershire, it was famous for its racing and top-end bikes, but faced a winding-up order for unpaid taxes. It is thought that up to 100 jobs could be at risk. Now, we were a nation that once prided itself on our manners, but perhaps not quite so much anymore, as the European Parliament gave the Brexit deal the rubber stamp today and bid farewell to our MEPs. One of our toughest opponents noted that we had liberated the continent twice and Europe would be perpetually in our debt. But our parting shot, as you will see, was rather less gracious.
They joined hands and sang Auld Lang Syne. After the years of debate, often spilling over into recrimination, there was a genuine sadness amongst all but the most Eurosceptic that after 47 years it should end like this. Brexit is official. There's little that hasn't already been said about it, but in the debate many said it again anyway, this time just adding the word goodbye.
It's in fact sad to see a country leaving that twice liberated us, twice given its blood to liberate Europe. I can only say we will miss you.
If that was an attempt to calm the rows that have engulfed this place for the last 3.5 years, Nigel Farage was having none of it.
Once we've left, we are never coming back, and the rest, frankly, is detail. No more being talked down to, no more being bullied, no more Guy Verhofstadt. I mean, what's not to like? I know you're going to miss us. I know you want to ban our national flags, but we're going to wave you goodbye.
Flags not being allowed in the chamber, the Brexit Party's brief stay in the European Parliament ended on exactly the note of controversy they were looking for.
Please sit down, resume your seats, put your flags away, you're leaving, and take them with you.
And for those who predict Britain's departure as the beginning of the end of the EU, this from a French MEP very close to President Macron.
If some of you think that the next phase is the weakening of the EU, we will prove you dead wrong. We will renew Europe. Make it better.
And with that, it was all over, bar the voting, which, as expected, was a formality. By a huge margin, 621 to 49, Brexit was ratified and became settled law. Commission President von der Leyen had quoted George Eliot, "Only in the agony of parting do we look into the depths of love." Well, agony and love may have overstated it, but few members were unmoved by the moment. The President of the Parliament signed at the bottom, and that was it. Brexit happens on Friday. There have been many reminders here today that while this is Brexit, it is far from the end of the Brexit process. The Parliament will debate the subject again because any future trade deal must be ratified here. Only next time there will be no British voices among their number. James Mates, News at 10, Brussels.
Now, some of you will be excited by the prospect, some perhaps dreading it. Either way, it is a momentous occasion in our national history, and I will have a special programme this Friday night as we count down to the UK's departure from the EU. So please do join me for Brexit Live, an ITV News special from 10 p.m. All right, one person who says he won't be celebrating on Friday is Sir Keir Starmer. The man who has been in charge of Labour's Brexit policy for the last 3 years will technically be out of a job on Saturday morning. He has, of course, got plenty on his plate since he is seen by many as the front-runner to be the next Labour leader. And after many years in the public eye, first as a lawyer, then a politician, we may feel we know him well, but he says that's only half the story. There is also Keir, the father, husband and son.
On this latest leg of his political journey is Sir Keir Starmer already pulling away. We travelled with the front-runner in this contest through lost Labour lands in Lancashire, a man who's long been set on his destination.
You are named after...
Keir Hardie, yeah.
Founder of the Labour Party.
Absolutely.
So do you think being leader is in your destiny? You know, you've been given that name?
If it is, I obviously had no choice over the name. I can't claim any credit for that. I think that reflects the fact that my family were a very strong Labour family.
You did have some tough times as a family, didn't you?
My mum was very, very ill all of her life. She had a rare disease called Still's disease, which is where your immune system attacks itself. For the last 10 years or so of her life, she couldn't walk, she couldn't talk, eat, or really move.
How do you think that affected your politics?
I think it made me very determined. My mum was very, very determined. From the moment she was told, you're not going to walk again, she decided she was going to walk again.
He rose to become a human rights lawyer, then Director of Public Prosecutions, moving from the courts to the Commons in 2015. Now Shadow Brexit Secretary, he did once resign from Jeremy Corbyn's team, but winning over members requires loyalty to the leader and his legacy.
Some people say you're a wolf in sheep's clothing because you claim to be a socialist, but how can Labour members trust you not to move the party towards the centre?
I don't claim to be anything. All I've done is set out what I've done with my life. I think the radical changes we've made since 2015 have been right.
So the Labour Party stays right where it is on the left of politics, no shift?
The fundamentals are radical. Of course they have to be radical.
Can't you just give that guarantee that you won't move the party towards the centre? It feels as if you're trying to escape something here, that maybe you're thinking in the back of your head, as soon as I'm leader, I'm going to shift the party.
I don't know how you're getting to that, because I'm repeatedly saying the shift we've made in the last 5 years is the right shift. The 2017 manifesto is the foundational document, but that we need to build on that for 2024.
Now that you accept we are going to leave the EU on Friday,
yes.
How will you be marking that moment?
They will probably have me in a room or a bar practising for the hustings the next day.
It's not a moment for celebration for you, it's not a moment that you wish to mark in any significant way?
It won't be a moment of celebration. I won't be marking it. I accept what is going to happen.
Not least because his own job disappears come Friday, but then Sir Keir Starmer hopes to walk into a new one. Paul Brand, News at 10, Lancashire.
When Donald Trump announced his plan for peace in the Middle East, the Palestinians were conspicuous by their absence. That's because they weren't invited and wouldn't have turned up even if they had been. That's not to say they have no view on it. They do. Not surprisingly, they hate it. After all, the plan hands large parts of the West Bank over to Israel, including existing illegal Israeli settlements. In exchange, the Palestinians would gain control of some mostly desert areas near the Egyptian border. They would also have to forego a Palestinian army, with Israel keeping external security control. But the American president claims there could be $50 billion of investment. To most Palestinians, though, it's not so much a peace plan, more an insult following years of injury.
The clashes in part of the West Bank today were predictable. Israeli soldiers and Palestinian youths trading tear gas and stones. But it was comparatively low-key. After all, the Palestinians have got used to feeling let down by President Trump. They and their leaders knew they would hate his peace plan. The only surprise is that they regard it as even worse than they expected.
But you have to have a certain degree either of ignorance or determination to violate international law, to violate all the imperatives of peace, to destroy the chances of peace and call it a peace plan. In every possible way, it takes every single component of a real peace and destroys it.
Where many Palestinians took to the streets today was in city and town centres to go about their normal business, showing no sign, outwardly at least, of the fact they feel betrayed by Washington.
The overall mood today, it's more human emotion, more than anything else. You know, the days of the Intifada, the first and the second Intifada, people were more up in arms literally. Today they're up in arms figuratively.
The second Intifada, or uprising, began 20 years ago and soon became extremely violent and ruinous for the Palestinians. Today there's no sign of an appetite for a third Intifada, but neither is there consensus on where the cause goes from here. Tonight, the cry of the muezzin over East Jerusalem was louder than normal, a response perhaps to what the Palestinians see as the most hurtful aspect of the Trump plan, the absence of any recognition of their emotional and historical attachment to this city. After Mecca and Medina, the Al-Aqsa Mosque compound is the third most important site in Islam. And the Palestinians will never support any peace plan that does not give them at least part of the Holy City as their capital. John Irvine, News at 10, Jerusalem.
Some news about us now, and in particular one of our colleagues, Alistair Stewart. ITN, the company that makes this programme, has announced that he is stepping down from presenting duties after making errors of judgment on social media and breaching editorial guidelines. Alistair was the longest-serving newsreader on British television. During his time with ITV, he has led coverage of events from the fall of the Berlin Wall to general elections and budgets. He says he regrets the misjudgment, and it had been a privilege to bring the news to households across the UK for more than 40 years. And finally, Jamie Chadwick might not be a household name yet, but that may be about to change dramatically. The 21-year-old has her sights set on a place on the F1 starting grid. She's hoping to follow in the tyre marks of Italian driver Lella Lombardi, the last woman to race at the highest level in the 1970s. And after winning last year's inaugural all-woman championship, there are plenty of people who think she is a force to be reckoned with.
She is surrounded by motor racing history and she is hoping to make a piece of her own. Jamie Chadwick's goal is to become the first female Formula One driver in almost half a century.
From my point of view, I would expect that I would want to be there in 3 or 4 years. The goal is to be there on merit, to ultimately one day be in a position to win world championships and win races in Formula One. And yeah, I think the ultimate goal is to be there and be there on merit.
Thorns in this race, she's the only lady driver.
There hasn't been a woman on the starting grid since Lella Lombardi in the 1970s. But Jamie is on track to change that.
Jamie Chadwick wins the first W Series race.
She won last season's inaugural women's only championship and was the first woman to win a British F3 race. Williams was so impressed, they've made her a development driver, which involves simulation training and engineer support.
Every driver that's ever been in one of these cars has been a man. How is it not having a role model who is a woman?
For me, it doesn't make a massive difference. I think I know what I can achieve and what I want to go on and do in the sport. But I completely understand that there's a reason why there aren't that many women in motorsport, and we need role models at the top. So fingers crossed one day I can drive one of these cars and change that.
She started racing relatively late, when she was 11, competing against and defeating her older brother Oliver. A decade later, this sport is still dominated by men, but she doesn't believe that will hold her back.
Bernie Ecclestone said that it's too physical for women. What are your thoughts on that?
I see it as motivation, and I genuinely believe that women are strong enough to make it to Formula One, and yeah, the ultimate goal is to prove that.
And it is that determination she needs if she wants to one day see her own picture staring back at her. Amy Lewis, News at 10.
Well, really good luck to her. And that is all we have time for, I'm afraid, on News at 10 tonight. We'll have more tomorrow from the terrible situation in China, and no doubt on Brexit as we build up to the big day. Please do watch us on Friday. But for now, I'll see you same time, same place tomorrow night. Good night. Thank you for watching.